Let's talk about the joint-by-joint approach. Dr. Miller with this important concept. If you're involved with human movement, in other words, you move your body or you watch other people move theirs and you try to help them move better, you should have this knowledge in your back pocket, okay? The body, if you haven't noticed, is arranged in a sequential pattern of mobile and stable. So I have my skeleton picture here. If we just go through the shoulder here, the shoulder is extraordinarily highly mobile, and then the elbow joint is extraordinarily stable. And then you get down in the wrist, mobile again. If we look in the lower extremity, you have another, so ball and socket, right? Scapula, pelvis, right? You have this similar long bone, single long bone here, and then two long bones at the bottom. Same thing with the lower extremity as well. But you have a mobile hip, a stable knee, modified hinge joint, and then if we could see down further, the ankle, right, is mobile again. So you have this mobile, stable in our spine, okay? You have a mobile T-spine, a stable L-spine, and then a mobile hip. The cervical spine should be stable as well, although it has some mobility. Just because something can be mobile doesn't mean it always should be, okay? And so, again, you have this pattern. So what does this mean? Who cares? A couple things. I'm going to frame this in two ways. My ugly picture over here is supposed to be a lower extremity. So here's the pelvis, okay, very crudely drawn. Here's a femur, here's a knee, extraordinarily long tibia, fibula, and then the ankle, and then the foot here. And so think about this. Obviously, I drew this on the same person, but if somebody had foot strike patterns when they're running right at you, okay? If they have knee problems on their right leg, you're looking at their left, so the one I'm highlighting here. You might go to the doctor. Doctor would say, hey, man, your knee hurts. Why don't you stop running for a bit? And if I was the doctor, I'd be like, quit running. You need to start lifting, right? Why are you wasting your time? But that's a different video. My anti-jogging video, check that out if you haven't already. If I do work with runners and just work with athletes in general, and my knee hurts, so you deal with it, and then it felt better, and then you do it again, and my knee hurts again. Well, you're not addressing the issue. And so what you have is a stable joint that's telling you that there's something going on because a stable joint is becoming mobile. So that means the mobile joint is either too mobile, it could be the ankle, it could be the hip, it could be both. The mobile joint is either too mobile or it is not mobile. So it's hyper stiff. So let's say this is a common pattern. What you're seeing here is if somebody has a fallen arch, is the common terminology, the medial arch, so the inside of the foot, and they don't have any support. And so that's called overpronation. They have the arch collapse upon landing. And so that foot, then the arch collapses here. And in so doing, it's like the building collapsing. The knee comes in, and then the hip, you see this valgus collapse at the knee. And so now the hip is put under stress. There's a muscle wrapped around here called the glute medius, if you're not familiar. And if that muscle isn't strong enough to deal with this, then you have a full collapse of the leg like this. And that can be, that doesn't make the knee feel real good. If the ankle had the same problem, but the hip, the glute med was strong enough, you'd still see a collapse, but not the same degree as you would, if the hip is strong enough. So in other words, you can look at this linkage of mobile, stable, in this case, looking at the lower extremity and mobile, stable, mobile, and say, well, if the stable joint has a problem, I need to go back and look. In this case, it's the ankle, and it could be the subtalar joint, so there's just too much movement going on at the foot that's causing this collapse to occur at the knee, and that now the knee is angry. The stable joint is no longer stable. The stable joint is becoming mobile, and that's when injuries occur. You could see the same thing, in the sport of Olympic-style weightlifting. You might notice, especially in females, hyperextended elbows can be an issue. When you ever see somebody that has those, they tend to blow that UCL ligament, the ligament on the inside of their elbow. One of the things to watch out for, and not only is the elbow position, but is when you see somebody holding a bar overhead that has a wrist position like this, okay, instead of having that kind of like the J hook holding the bar. If their wrist, and I broke this wrist before, I can't do it real good, but if your wrist is significant extension, maybe I'll do the other hand, right? There you go, a little better extension on this one. Okay, if the wrist is extensive, their shoulders are tight, and so the body's smart, and it says, okay, put the bar straight over your head. Well, if my shoulders are tight, okay, and in reality, if I kept that wrist straight, when I'd reach overhead, the bar would be out in front. Okay, that's hard to see in my video, but I'm reaching out front. I'm exaggerating this. I'm trying to get the bar straight overhead so I can cheat by opening my ribs up, or I can cheat by pushing the wrist back because that moves the bar back over my head. Well, if somebody has hypermobile elbows on top of that, has hyperextended elbows on top of that, putting the bar in this position now really puts more shear on that elbow. I don't know if this is making sense because I can't do a video, but essentially the compensation pattern, you're using a joint that's mobile in the wrist, and you're making it hypermobile now. And in so doing, you're creating more shear forces on the stable joint. And the reason that that wrist became hypermobile was because the shoulder, which should be mobile, is too stable, right? It's not mobile enough. So again, you have this linkage issue. The shoulder's too stiff. The elbow is hyperextended already, even if the elbow wasn't hyperextended, but the elbow's already in a bad position because it's a stable joint that's already in a disadvantageous position by being hypermobile. And then you have a wrist now that's causing, it's trying to make up for the shoulder mobility issue. And so you have a wrist that's going into hyperextension, if you want to think of it that way. In other words, there's too much extension. Okay. So your wrist is an extension. Let me use the correct word. So the wrist is an extension that is greater than it should be. And so instead of more of a neutral wrist, right? Let me get my video here. Right? You have an extended wrist, okay? And because the barbell is behind the elbow tends to push forward. Now you have shear forces on the elbow. Okay, so that's an example of the shoulder's too tight, the wrist makes up for it, the elbow eats it. Okay? And so if you're watching somebody put a bar overhead, you'd want to say, okay, if first check their shoulder mobility, and if it's not adequate and they're cheating through the wrists, well, address the shoulder mobility. If it turns out their shoulder mobility is good and they're just being and then they're just not stabilizing the wrist sufficiently, they have too much movement in the wrist, that needs to be corrected, or the elbow is going to get exposed further and further, and they're going to potentially damage their elbow. I've seen that, right, where this has occurred when that's not addressed. So again, the joint by joint approach. The last example here would be the spine. Okay, the lower back, right, should be stable. That's why one of the reasons you don't want to necessarily crank on this thing when you're stretching. Deal with the mobile joints. If you have a back spasm, don't sit there and crank on the lower back. Open up the hips. Any muscles that are hanging off the hips here, and then the T-spine above, those should be mobilized. So adductors, hamstrings, obviously, hip flexors. Okay, these are muscles that should be dealt with, mobilized. And then the T-spine can you rotate through the T-spine? That's what's that's one of its major contributions to movement is having T-spine extension, and then T-spine rotation. All right. If T-spine is locked up, then the L-spine is rotating. That's not good, right? If there is no ability to, create any T-spine extension through lat activation and pulling the chest up in order to buttress the spine against a load, then the L-spine is going to eat it, okay? If the hips are too tight and you can't go into a hip hinge pattern, the lower back's going to be the hinge point now, and the lower back's going to eat it, okay? So, again, this is this understanding of, oh, my lower back hurts. Well, you're probably using it, right? That stable part of your body, the lower back, should be in neutral for the most part. And if it's not, then if you're doing an RDL or a deadlift and your lower back is always lit up, and it's not just tired from stabilizing, but it's been the primary mover or contributing, then you should go back and look at are you able to set up properly with your T-spine? And when you activate your lats, are you really able to create a good spinal position that you're protecting your lower back through your lat activation? Or are the hips so dang tight that you just can't get in the appropriate position to pull, or when you pull, you don't have good glute activation, and so you're pulling through your lower back. I mean, you pick something, but it's not okay that your lower back hurts. Okay, that's not okay. You need to go back and look at, that would be the first way to start, is what is going on with my mobile joints. Are they too mobile, or are they not mobile enough? And if you can start looking at the body in that light, whether you're a coach or you're just somebody that loves moving the barbell around or just like to train, you can start to figure out, and I'm not, you can't I don't want to use the word diagnose. We're not diagnosing anything, but at least you can start to figure out superficially what might be going on. Film yourself lifting, film yourself running, whatever, have somebody else do it for you. And you might see these linkages where the breakdown is occurring. And the stable joint now is mobile because one of the mobile joints is either too stable or is too mobile. Hopefully that's helpful. I think it's one of those basic understandings of how the body is built that can really pay off, pay a lot of dividends in terms of improving movement overall. If you haven't had a chance, subscribe to my channel, like this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Check out my library of videos on a variety of topics in exercise and sports science. Dr. Miller. I'll see you in the next one. I don't say Dr. Miller out. That sounds too 90s. All right. See you later.